Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today, George Plaster of Nashville Sports Radio. We thank our presenting sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers personal and professional development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We also thank our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Our news presented by Sutherland & Belk, a Nashville-based injury law firm. Sutherland & Belk is committed to fighting for those who have been in car, motorcycle, and truck accidents. Check them out at sbinjurylaw.com. Vanderbilt takes on Buffalo Tuesday night in men's basketball. Tip-off will be at Memorial Gym at 7 Central. That game can be shown on the SEC Network Plus. Our guest line, presented by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on their sheets for years. They're amazing. Had no clue what I was missing till I got them. They are fair trade certified, meaning they're made under safe conditions by men and women, treated and paid fairly. Try them for a month. You can return them for free, but you won't want to. Once you get the sheets, try their mattress. That was voted the best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That is spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy and get $50 off your first set of sheets. George Plaster is with us now. George, thank you for taking the time to join us today. Hope your Thanksgiving went well.
Absolutely. It did. I now weigh 430 pounds. My God, I ate a lot of food.
But it was worth it.
Well, it was worth it then. I'm not sure the residual of trying to go to the Y and make it somehow work out is.
Is Greek Thanksgiving any different than Thanksgiving for the rest of us?
Not that I'm aware of. In truth, Greek Orthodox is virtually Catholic. Greek, obviously, where predominantly in English. But other than that, really, it's about the same.
I actually have a few friends that are Greek Orthodox. It's fascinating to me, and I have actually been to Greece, and it is unforgettable. I mean, it was just phenomenal when I was there.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I've never been.
Oh, my goodness, George.
My mom and dad, when they were alive, used to go fairly often because my dad worked for American Airlines, and so he found the price of the tickets to be right up his alley.
I was over there, oh goodness, I think it was 2009 or 2010. I remember sitting in a hotel looking out, and I think I could see the Parthenon from where we were, and I was watching Vanderbilt in the Super Regional in Louisville, or in a regional. So that's one of my memories of Greece that ties into the show. So there you go.
Very nice.
Yeah, it was. It was an unforgettable evening. The view was pretty phenomenal. But let's talk Vanderbilt. Thankfully, the football season is over. That's about all I have to say at this point. I don't know what is really memorable or notable about that game other than the Juwan Jennings incident. There just isn't much left to talk about.
Well, let me say this. At the point that we take this, I'm not aware that either the University of Tennessee or the SEC has taken any action on Jennings' deal, which there's just no place in sports for that. But I don't really understand what either one or the other group is waiting on. I mean, you have to do something.
Let's talk. This is the way that I think about it right now. This occurred to me this morning. Okay, the principle in targeting is to prevent injury, right? And you can be ejected for targeting for just being careless, even if you didn't mean to. They don't legislate intent into that. So if they're trying to prevent head injuries and things like that, then why is that not a no-brainer suspension, given what we know about how targeting is handled?
Well, I think it is. Chris, I think the bigger problem is what you saw all weekend long, rivalry weekend. And, you know, I blame a little bit of this on the officials because the officials in these various games have got to set the record straight when they meet with the captains at midfield. And basically, it has to be a little bit of a butt chewing. They need to tell the captains, we're not putting up with your crap. And if you think so, just try us. And, a little preventative medicine could go a long way. The Georgia Tech thing is another one that's disgraceful. The Ole Miss incident at the end of the game is disgraceful. Now, don't get me wrong, it wasn't just in the SEC, but the SEC certainly led the way. And I'm a little disappointed that I'm not hearing more out of the SEC office because they owe it to the game to clean this kind of crap up.
Yes, and let's be clear, that game, the Vanderbilt-Tennessee game, was not the best moment for either program. I believe Vanderbilt got 4 personal fouls. The Keyshawn Vaughn one on the first play of the game where he ripped Alontae Taylor's helmet off. I perceive that was probably retaliation for last year where I think he was targeted. Doesn't excuse it, but it might give some context. And I don't know what the context for Jawan Jennings being all fired up was. I don't know if he got cheap shotted at some point in the game. I don't know if he just hates Vanderbilt. Well, I mean, he does. We've seen that. But there's no way of excusing it. And Vanderbilt also, to that end of things, look, when you're going up to Knoxville and you know what's coming, you've got to be more disciplined than to get 4 personal fouls.
Agreed. I just worry more in a bigger picture about college football and this kind of thing, the way it kept happening over the weekend. And we both know what ends up going on. It's these silly deals before the game where both teams are out there, supposedly doing their pregame stuff. And instead, really what they're doing is a lot of woofing and a lot of talking about, your mama and all that kind of stuff. And what it does, it just fuels the possibility of this. And the officials look, when certain riots, if that's a brain, they have to know it's volatile. And so they have to do a better job early of setting the tempo and basically showing the players, we will not be putting up with this. And if you think we are, try us out and see what happens.
George, we have an exceptionally deep mailbag today. I think we just go there and take those as they come, if that's cool with you.
Well, let me say this. I'm not surprised.
No, you seem to be a very popular guest for our mailbag feature.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I think it's called being a lightning rod.
Right. Today's mailbag is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. Are you in the market for auto, motorcycle, home, renters, or landlord insurance? What about life or commercial insurance? Call Josh at 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He is my insurance agent. I hope you will make him yours. One Star Bandit says, whether he believes the explanation or not, ask George to justify the decision to keep Mason and or Turner's vociferous support of him as the head coach.
Well, I'm not really going to try to because I don't particularly agree with the decision. I don't know that we're ever going to know what really went on. My suspicion, which I may never be able to prove, that I may not ever be able to prove, is that Malcolm Turner was not given the go-ahead by an interim chancellor to buy out Mason and his staff. That's what I believe until I find out otherwise. But do I have any proof? No.
I agree with you. I cannot out and out prove it, but I have heard the same thing from some of my sources. And eventually, whether that was how it came to be or not, I do think the chancellor has to sign off on that sort of thing. So one way or another, I do think it was somewhat of a factor. But is it fair to say sort of the elephant in the room right now is the fact that they can go and get Will Healy if they want him, and he's maybe even by the time this podcast airs, potentially going to be the head coach at Missouri?
maybe. Um, Obviously, I have beat the bongos for Will Healy, who I consider a really good friend. I haven't talked to him in a couple of weeks, but I know that the job he's done in his first year at Charlotte was remarkable. They came on at the end of the season. His timing was perfect. He won, I think, five in a row to close out 7-5. When they beat Marshall, that's when I started to say, you know what? He's going to start getting people's attention. As I've said before on this podcast, he is a relentless recruiter, which is what Vandy needs. I don't think this staff is relentless the way the James Franklin staff was. I think Will Healy and his staff are. And the other thing, Will turned out to be an amazing fundraiser at Austin Peay. Raised several hundreds of thousands of dollars for Austin Peay football. And a lot of the success that they're having right now, I believe Will Healy deserves some of the credit for. Obviously, Mark Hudspeth deserves some of it too, as the new head coach at Austin Peay. And the other thing that I can't put my finger on, but people who know Will agree with me, he has kind of an it factor. People gravitate to him. He's just somebody that people get on board with and really support. And right now, Vanderbilt needs something like that desperately.
Yeah, and I'm going to circle back to some topics related to that in just a minute with another question, but let's take this one for now. Vandy Nash says, can Derek Mason ever recover from his press conference post-Kentucky, which included shots at players and the comment that Vanderbilt goes in waves? Or will that be used to recruit against him and continue to infiltrate the mindset of the program?
Well, they're two different answers. The second one is you're darn right it'll be used against him. These college recruiters are not stupid, and he gave them some cannon fodder. Um, when there's a scenario where a school here that's going to get used. Now, the answer to the first question is, can he ever recover from the post-game press conference? Sure, he could. Excuse me. It's called winning at a level that gets people so happy they don't care. Is that going to happen? Probably not. But can a coach recover from that kind of thing? Sure.
One Star Bandit asks, how has the perception of the Vanderbilt coaching job changed from when Mason took it to now? Or on the assumption that at some point in the near future, Vanderbilt will be looking for a new coach?
Well, I may steal that question and throw it back at you when you come on my show Tuesday at 3 o'clock. That's a terrific question. The worry a little bit is that if you're trying to sell that coaching job right now, that it feels like the mid 90s. And believe me, I know a little bit about that because I was the play-by-play announcer during some of the worst of Vanderbilt football. Their offense this year just looked like the Damian Allen model. This team couldn't do the simplest of things. How it gets perceived, that's a really good question, and I guess a lot of it will be if and when that time comes, what kind of a sales job Malcolm Turner can do, and what does he have in his back pocket to show a potential coach down the road, hey, here are the plans, this is what we're doing, here's what we've raised. That's probably have to change the perception.
The thing that it seems to me that they have not accounted for is the erosion of the fan base by keeping him for another year. And you can say, well, we would like to be able to present facilities plans and have those on the table for a new coach, which I totally understand. But is there a way to do that? Another way without it being official to a coach? Because I just wonder, would you rather be a new coach and look at things and say, hey, we've got this brand new stadium or this refurbished stadium we're going to have, but then you look in the stands and there's 5,000 Vanderbilt fans at every game? Or is there a better alternative there? I don't know if I did a good job of phrasing that, but I just keep thinking about, okay, what if they build this nice new building and nobody's there to show up?
Well, here. First of all, I think it's safe to assume that if they go through the plan that Mason comes back next year. Season ticket sales are going to be abysmal. But you could also argue they didn't exactly, hang the moon this year. Um, the fan base issue is one that Derek Mason didn't start. This started well before Derek Mason. He just hasn't done anything to help it. At this point, if I'm him during the off season, I would get out and speak to a lot of civic clubs and you know, try to drum up some support somewhere if that's possible. He has chosen more of a stay in his cave kind of deal, which a lot of Vanderbilt coaches over the years have done. And I have strongly encouraged Malcolm Turner that in the future, that be one of the prerequisites to hiring, that people have to understand that they've got to be involved in this. Um, to really answer your question, could it have been done? Could you show a new potential coach enough of the plans? I think you could, but I don't know enough about what the plans are or where they are to really make an educated guess.
One thing that I always hear on attendance is, well, it's always been bad. And I say, well, yes, in a way it has, although I still think Franklin taking 35,000 fans to the Birmingham Bowl, that was only 6 years ago. So I always look at it like this. It's like you can fail a test and you can make a 65, or you can fail a test and you can make a 10. And I think that's where they are right now. Attendance has always been low compared to other people, but it's at ghastly levels now. I don't ever remember a year, and you tell me if I'm wrong, that they had fewer of their own fans in the stands for home games. And by the way, that's coming off a bowl appearance last year, albeit 6-7.
From beginning to end, this was the worst as far as attendance I've ever seen. Some of it was obvious. Georgia and LSU were going to ransack Nashville, and we knew that. Some of the rest of it just became I'm not interested. I'm not buying what they're doing. They're boring. All of the above. It's reached an all-time low, and it was bad enough that Malcolm Turner could have used that as the only excuse to make a coaching change. To just say, look, our fans have spoken loudly with a vote of no confidence, and I've got to do something.
Next question is from Door King. Agree or disagree Vanderbilt is too cheap to replace Derek Mason?
I don't know it for sure, but I'd say there's a strong likelihood that that's the way this went down. That's not to say they haven't bought out coaches. Just ask Bryce Drew. They certainly did buy him out. And I think that may have been a factor in this not happening now with Mason. I had thought for a while that might be the best thing he had going for him, was that while the school has plenty of money, the athletic department does not. And that's obviously a big rub with a lot of people who care about athletics.
Maybe the better question is, did they make an effort to try to find the money to buy him out?
I don't know that answer. I think they're smart enough to know I don't have any, so I don't get contacted in those kind of deals. Do you?
No, I do not. And I couldn't anyway, but I did hear that complaint a little bit from a booster or two that, well, hey, I'm sitting here with my checkbook, ready to help out if that's needed, but I didn't get a phone call. Now, I don't know if that is fair or not. And I mean, God knows how many boosters Malcolm Turner would have to contact personally, or if he were to start going down that list. But point is, perception is reality. And I do wonder, even if that was an option for Malcolm, if Vanderbilt would have let him do that.
Well, I'll say this: if you have any other boosters that already have their checkbook out, give them my address.
Yes, mine too.
Um, because I'll take whatever table scraps are available. Um, we're probably never going to know for sure, but until somebody comes out and really tells us how all this went down, it makes for kind of a good soap opera, and it's a pretty believable one based on past history at the school.
Well, there are two problems with that. One of them is, as you know, the truth at Vanderbilt is very difficult to find out, and it's usually a very closely guarded secret. And often, what is put out there, there's some, at best, inconsistencies between those accounts and things that you and I often know for sure.
Yeah, it's the benefit of being a private school that you have the ability to do more of that. No
Exactly.
question about it.
And they take advantage of that, I believe.
Sure.
Dorking says, agree or disagree, the quarterback situation going into next season is pathetic.
It's a strong word, but I don't really know how to disagree with it. I mean, I don't know what they've got unless one of the recruits that plays quarterback steps up and just wins the job outright at the beginning, and you go through some growing pains with whoever that may be, but that down the road it gets better. I mean, I'm really mystified by a lot of things at their quarterback situation. Riley Neal played for a friend of mine at Ball State, Mike New, who once was the offensive coordinator of the Nashville Cats. And I've wanted to call, I haven't done it yet, but I've wanted to call Mike just to kind of find out, was this really the level that Riley Neal played at Ball State? Because, for instance, in Knoxville, it was awful. Now, he had the line to help him. There's a lot of things about this that don't make any sense. When Mason came out and said he had two quarterbacks that, he felt very comfortable with, really? Who are they? He said that.
Oh, lots of things were said this year.
Yeah. And so it's either one of two things. Either he was blowing smoke, knowing full well that he had a big problem, or he really believed this and the staff believed it, and they're not a very good judge of quarterback talent. Listen, I've said this before on this podcast, and I'll say it again. Derek Mason needs to send Kyle Shermer a big old Christmas present, because Kyle Shermer has kept him employed, through a 3-year period where he was really good and he was really durable.
Well, and it wasn't just his play. I think that they had leadership, and particularly leadership on that side of the ball the last few years with Shermer, with Bruno Reagan, with Trent Sherfield, that served as a backstop for a lot of the things that the coaching staff just seems incapable of doing. And when those guys left, you saw what happened.
Yeah. Not much more that needs to be added other than yep.
Dorking says, do you expect a new offensive coordinator? Who are the candidates? Is Tim Horton a possibility?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the last part? Is who a possibility?
Tim Horton. He is their running backs coach, and a pretty well-regarded one.
Right. First of all, I don't know how you could return the present scenario. I mean, that offensive staff, they just get total Fs, in my opinion, as far as a grade. They were so bad. So I don't think you can do that. Now, I've made this suggestion privately, and so I'll go ahead and say it here. If I were Derek Mason, I would pick up the phone and I would call Watson Brown, not to get Watson Brown to join the staff, but to give him a list of names of bright young offensive minds that Watson has respect for in the business. I think they would be really short-sighted if all they do is just hire from within, because within hadn't been good enough. It hadn't been anywhere close. And so, Mason and Watson Brown know each other. I'm surprised that hasn't already happened. But I would certainly pick Watson Brown's brain when it comes to offensive, scheming, and yet we know. Here's the other thing. Okay, so you identify some people that are really good. Who in the world wants to come here knowing full well that the likelihood is this is a one and done? Well, that's where Malcolm Turner has to step in. If they can identify a candidate who would be willing to do this, that candidate's probably going to say to Malcolm Turner, look, you're going to have to pay me for 2 or 3 years guaranteed no matter what. And those are just the facts of life. I mean, once they made this decision to retain Derek Mason, this is one of the facts of life that's going to rear its ugly head when they try to do something. Now, they bring back this staff intact. Wow.
Well,
I don't know what else would need to be said.
and that's where I think you get into contradictions, because if you read between the lines and dig a little deeper, basically the defense of keeping Mason is we don't want to throw good money after bad until we get the stadium done. Well, then what does that leave you with coordinators? Because either you have to do what you said or you have to hire on the cheap. And either way, it's the same in terms of throwing good money after bad potentially.
Under the category, and this may well be in your mailbag of how does this get any better? I don't know that I really have the answer, but I think here are a couple of things. I'm sure that he'll be banking like young D better years maturity, but then I think he's got to go create something on offense that maybe is a change of philosophy, throw it around some, have some fun, because losing is bad. Losing and being dull is doubly bad. And that has driven people away in droves. This group was deathly dull.
Well, last spring, when it became apparent that Bryce Drew could get fired, I started talking about the possibility of, I think it probably would be the right call as much as I liked him personally. And as much potential as I'd seen him at times, I thought it was the right call because everywhere you turned, you saw a dead end. Like, okay, well, what are they going to be next year? And then is that going to be good enough to bring hope for the coming year? That'd be 2 years from now, and that sort of thing. And everywhere you looked, it was just hard to find answers. I see the same thing with Derek, and I'm doing a study. I told you about this right now, and I will run this piece for free at the site later in the week. I am looking at how often the situation has happened at other Power 5 schools where you let a guy start his career, or heck, not even start his career, have 6 consecutive losing seasons at any point, and he keeps his job for a 7th. It's very rare, and B, once you get in the ballpark of that situation, the best case scenario is almost always this. And it happened kind of with Bobby Johnson too. You have that breakthrough season. His was 7-6. Some were better, but then what happens is that's usually a group with a lot of seniors. It's a kind of a everything aligned right one year, and you find lightning in a bottle. You have a good season, and then what happened was there was a fall off from there back to the previous levels of futility at these places. And what happened is coach eventually gets fired because they're like, okay, that was a one-off success. That is a long-winded way of saying no matter how you slice it, it just seems to be a dead end.
Yeah, and the only trick to this for me, because it's obvious to me, I don't see how they're going to be a ton better a year from now. But I've written Derek Mason off before. In fairness to him, I wrote him off a long time ago, and he proved me wrong for about 3 years. And I guess my new theory is that Kyle Shermer did as much of it as Derek Mason did, to sort of jazz that thing up and make it really fun and beat Tennessee 3 years in a row and all that kind of stuff that is the positive for Derek Mason. That's really the only thing I have, that would be a word of caution, is that I've written Derek Mason off before, and for about a 3 year period, I was wrong, and good for him. But I don't really know. I'm not sure I see how he wiggles out of this, and I don't really know. I don't really know how much of this he was asked Saturday after the game. Okay, this is over. How is this going to get better? Then you may be able to tell me more than I know about whether that really got discussed or not.
Well, I was not there. I did hear some bits and pieces of it, but I mean, basically, he said the offense is going to be way different next year, which he said before the Kentucky game. He said after last year. So again, consider the source. But yeah, I mean, the scenario next year, George, I think is their defense could be a lot better. They returned basically all their starters. They did get better in some ways, although they were never really good for any length of time. So it's questionable even if they have it in them. But let's, for argument's sake, let's say they do. I still don't think they finish above 500. And even when he quote unquote turned it around, 6-7 was the top end. So again, it's back to so what?
Yeah, I mean, look, the scenario would be that offensively they're good enough to keep their defense off the field. My suspicion is that their defense may be a little bit better than it looked, but because they had to deal with constant three and outs on the offensive side, they played way too many plays. And, this is Mason's fault, because it's not as though he didn't have some talent on the offensive side. That casual uh, had all proven to be really good players on the SEC level. So the fact that they weren't really able to get anything out of two of those three, that's their coaching staff's fault. I mean, it's not like you could say, well, two of the three were injured the whole year and never played. That's not the case. I mean, it's just simply bad coaching and bad utilization of talent.
Nirov says, would you consider Charlie Strong an upgrade to Jason Tarver?
Yeah, probably so. Um, you know, do I think Charlie Strong would go for that? No. Charlie Strong interviewed here once to be the head coach, and I'm told he didn't do a particularly good job in his interview. And so I don't really know. I mean, um, do I think that's where this is headed? No, but I guess it's one to kind of pay attention to.
Dusty Orleans says, we aren't losing much talent or production from seniors with the exception of Vaughn. I guess that's a statement instead of a question. Um, Here's the question. Mason is in demand for a position at any other institution or level, that being the NFL, XFL, etc., true or false?
I have no idea. Um, it's an interesting question, because I've thought if he could get himself into a position where maybe he could go somewhere that appeals to him, that he could go back to them and say, okay, I'm going to make it easy for you. I've got this possibility. If you're willing to pay me 40 cents on the dollar, I'll go. But do I know whether any of that's going on? I have no idea.
Oh, I think he can get a job somewhere as a coordinator or position coach. I don't have a lot of doubt about that. And look, he's had success in that before. And one thing that does amaze me, when I looked at these head coaches who'd been jettisoned after awful records, they almost always got a job, sometimes even a head coaching job again, doing something football related. So I don't think that there's In my mind, I think he's still fairly well regarded within the coaching community. Now, when people start looking at him as a head coach and digging in, you're going to have some obvious problems. But I think he can coach football at an assistant level.
Absolutely. Here's the part of this that, again, I have no idea what he's doing. But here's what I do know. The perks of being a head coach are a lot better than the perks of being a defensive coordinator or an assistant coach. They just are. The money's a lot better. The attention, good and bad, is ratcheted up. Head coaching life, is probably something he's enjoyed over the last 6 years. Made him a lot of money. It's a good life. He probably doesn't want to give that up, and I can't say I'd blame him.
But he also has to deal with the media every week in a head coaching position, and he does not in others.
Well, look, I mean, who's kidding who? He is not dealing with a really rough media. If he wants to see a rough media, go to Ann Arbor right now. He has no idea if that's a big concern of his right now. He might need to rethink that a little bit and look around, maybe talk to a Jim Harbaugh and just say, tell me what it's like up there.
Well, it's also reached the point that nobody's paying attention. He had more gaffes after the game Saturday, too. But it's like the women's basketball situation. When nobody's around to see it or hear it, it's like, who cares?
Well, I do think there is some of that where I think people have just gotten to the point where they're not paying any attention anymore. That's sort of an apathetic deal, and it's one of the problems that they're facing right now is there's a pretty good amount of apathy.
Dusty Orleans says, way too early prediction on how far baseball goes this season.
Well, I think we start with until we find out otherwise or know more, with injuries or those kind of things. But sure, I mean, they're one of, I don't know, probably 8 or 10 schools that you have to say, okay, out of this group will come next year's national champion. They're certainly one of them.
Well, let's throw hitting out for a moment. My take on the hitting is I think they're still very talented. Whether it clicks this year or whether it clicks this year, but maybe at the end of the year when it matters, I think that's a possibility. I don't know. But I just look at their pitching. I say, all right, they're going to have Hickman, Rocker in games 1 and 2 in some order. Probably Jake Eater, game 3, maybe Jack Leiter. Those kids, Eater particularly pitched very well at the end of the year and pitched very well in high pressure situations. Got them the last, 9 outs in Omaha to clinch the title. So you have those guys, and then you have Tyler Brown, who's that super reliever who can come in and give you 2, 3, 4, even 5 or 6 innings if you had to have it, to the point where they've considered him as a starter. I just keep looking at it and saying, who is going to score enough runs against them on the weekend with those arms and their durability?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, one of the things that is so amazing that he's been able to do is that he's reached a point where he's one of these programs like Alabama in football where he now is able to select. Now, you do recruit, don't get me wrong, but, he's got the ability to say, okay, I want you, I want you, I want you. And he's got a track record of all these people that have ended up pitching on the major league level. And you better believe these high school kids know it. And it's got their attention. I mean, what he's done here is just, I don't know that we could ever understand the miraculous work this guy's done.
I've joked with you, they ought to build a moat and put armed guards around that baseball complex to keep anything from coming in and screwing that up.
Well, you know what? That's not a bad idea.
Oh, maybe that's where their fundraising needs to go.
Maggie would feel. Hey, I'm not sure how Maggie would feel about that, but I mean, it is. It's unbelievable what he's gotten done. Um, I think you could make the argument that he's the best coach in Vanderbilt coaching history based on what he's accomplished. And it's to watch pitchers, because obviously I'm a huge baseball fan, and to see the second and third tier of pitchers that he has put out there, I would see that on certain nights where the Tigers were going to throw Drew Verhagen or Sonny Gray when he even was struggling. Um, he's 10 deep or whatever the number is on the major league level of pitchers. It's just, I don't know that anybody else has got anywhere close to that number.
Tommy Dore says, Howell Pizer told me years ago that you have a tape of the closing Munson minutes of the Vandy, Michigan tournament game. If memory serves, Munson yells something like, Miller double dribbles in the lane. Oh no, we're blowing it, folks. Is there any way that you might share that, as well as a heads up on when and where it might be shared?
I was given the tape years ago. I have no idea where it is. And that's pitiful, because that's a great moment in broadcast history in this city. At the moment, I couldn't tell you that I know where it is, but the person that asked the question is right. That somebody had sent me that tape at some point, and I ran it on the air years ago, and I want to say it was in the early '90s when I was at WTN. Is where we ran it.
Well, should you find it, I know a podcast where you can air that.
Yeah. Well, it's a great idea.
Yeah.
And I don't know if something like that's on YouTube. I doubt it. But I'll say this: we could do a podcast on my relationship with Larry Munson. We're big buddies from when Munson was the play-by-play announcer at Vandy. And so as I'm growing up, Dad and Larry stayed in contact a lot. And some of their conversations obviously, got into, what I was trying to do career-wise. And then I guess this was in 1985, the Georgia Tech radio play-by-play job came open. And I was only 25 at the time, and I had absolutely no business being in the hunt. But Munson got me in the final four of that job. And, years later, he and Tony Barnhart wrote a book together. And I'm trying to find it. I'm about to walk in the room, see if I can find where this thing is. But Munson autographed a copy of the book to me and said something to the effect in it of, let's you and I go buy the Titans. Well, one of the stories on Munson, the last interview I ever did with him on the air, and they were always special because you never knew what in the hell was going to come out. He'd say anything. And at the very end of the interview, about a 20-minute interview that was really fascinating, he just goes back into teacher mode with me, and he goes, young Plaster, he said, if you had listened to me, you'd have made something of your life. And I was like, where the hell did that come from?
Oh, look at the clock.
Later. Yeah. And I called Dad later, and he goes, that's just Larry. He said, if he didn't like you, he wouldn't say it. He wouldn't pay any attention to you. And I can remember when I was doing the Georgia Tech television back when Calvin Johnson was there. And I remember at halftime running into him in the pizza line, and he goes, look at everybody grabbing all this food. he was a piece of work.
When he made that comment, did you feel like
him to death.
Did you feel like your face had been stepped on with a hobnail boot?
You know what? It's funny because I know David Green, the quarterback who put that together. Who threw the pass that had Munson say that, and nobody really knew what the hell a hobnail boot was. But it's just one of his great calls. The guy was truly amazing. I've got a lot of Larry Munson stories, but here's one near the end. It was when I was doing Georgia Tech's television. We'd gone up to play Virginia, and I had driven up there. And after the game was over, I'm driving back, and I'm trying to get to about Knoxville. And I'm listening, ironically, to a Georgia Vanderbilt game, Georgia Vandy football game in Nashville. And Munson by now has told me I can't see anything. That's the problem. And yet he was incredibly entertaining, even at 84 years old. And I remember I called him the next day, and I said, I don't want to hear all this crap about how old you are. I said, because at 84, you are still one of the most entertaining listen-tos going. The other guy that's really got some stories on Munson is another former Vandy play-by-play announcer, Wes Durham. Wes and Munson became very close when Wes ended up at Georgia Tech in the mid-90s. And, Wes and I have had a few of these sessions. It's just amazing. I mean, you talk about a character. God, Munson was a total character.
We will do a Larry Munson podcast this summer, I promise you, because I want to hear the stories too.
Yeah.
I love listening to the guy. I've got about 2 more questions than I've got to run in a few minutes, and I know you do too. You talked about your love for baseball. What's that?
Does this come under, I hate to do this, but I got to run?
It does. It very much comes under that.
Thank you.
Couple of questions. V Titan says, I would like your opinion because you were not on the radio at the time. What was your thought of Harold Baines making the Baseball Hall of Fame last year?
I agreed with that. I thought he would have put him in. And not everybody agrees with that. But for what it's worth, I would have put him in.
A question from 90 Dove. Brett Boone is a Hall of Famer, one of the best defensive second basemen to play. Gold Glove Award's not there because he was there during Robbie Alomar's Hall of Fame run, and fantastic defensive or offensive numbers for second baseman. So he wants your opinion whether he should be in the Hall. The WAR's not too high. It's 22.8, which I don't know that's the end-all be-all. I like Lou Whitaker, Bobby Grich, guys like that would have been higher than him. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, wait a minute. Let me make sure I've got this right. Brett Boone?
Brett Boone, yes.
Not even close.
I don't think so either.
No, not even close.
I'm looking at WAR scores for Hall of Famers. This is on Reddit. This was last year. Best WAR scores for guys not in. I won't give the decimals. Ted Simmons at catcher, 50. Todd Helton at first, 61. Lou Whitaker at second, 75. A guy named Bill Dahlin, who was a shortstop way back when, 75. Scott Rowland at third. And then you go to outfield. You got a lot of guys in the 60s and 70s, and pitchers the same. So according to WAR, he would not be anywhere close to that stratosphere.
Now, I'll say this. Todd Helton, that's one I think needs some discussion.
I would put Helton in for sure.
Helton,
yeah,
Todd Helton was a terrific hitter. And really, for a long time, was the face of the Colorado Rockies, pure and simple. He was it.
Larry Walker is the guy that I would put in, I think. I don't think he gets enough support. Yep. And even with Coors Field, they have ways to take all that out. And he's clearly a Hall of Fame worthy guy, and even missing parts of seasons like he did frequently. So
I think you could make a real argument on Walker. Yeah.
Yeah, and loved watching him play too. Okay, well, our time has come to an end, so I wanted to give you the floor to talk about your show, which I will be on today. Give out your Twitter handle, anything else of that nature.
Yeah, I actually have a Twitter account, which has shocked everybody. George Plaster TN. Look it up. You won't learn anything particularly earth-shattering, but I try to have some fun and keep it light. So I'm on the air Monday through Friday, 2 to 4 p.m. on WNSR, which is 560 AM. They also have an FM signal, which is 95.9. And if you cannot get the signal, you can always go get it on the app, WNSR app.
George, we appreciate you joining us.
And let me also say
Sure.
this. Watson Brown and Terry McCormick are a part of it, and I think you would enjoy it if you haven't heard it, because we do a lot of the kind of discussion that you're doing on this podcast.
Yes, I have listened many a time. You guys have a good show, and I'm looking forward to being on it today.
Well, we're looking forward to having you, Chris. Thank you for putting up with me. Great mailbag.
Yes, the mailbag always delivers. Well, likewise on the nice words there, and we'll see you next week.
Chris, thank you. Can we talk off air?
We can. He is George Plaster. I'm Chris Lee, and thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast.